occasionally I have been known to put the horse before the cart when it comes to covering sequels on this channel. In fact, the second review I ever uploaded to this channel was a sequel where I hadn't covered the original first. But tucking into Prancer Returns, the 2001 direct-to-video slog that ungraciously dripped out of the back end of Universal's film pipe at the start of the new millennium with little to no response from the public, I really did feel like I'd missed something. That's not to say that this film is heavily tied to the original. We're not dealing with a direct sequel or anything like that. It's just that this film is a very rare example of a movie which tries to piggyback off the cult success of a niche film which never really had any major success to begin with. This film is a semi-direct sequel to 1989's Prancer, a movie about a little girl who finds an injured deer in the wood and through the power of love and friendship is able to nurse it back to health, where it's revealed that the deer in question is none other than Prancer, one of Santa's reindeer. Given that the film is called Prancer, it doesn't really come as a surprise that the deer in question is Prancer, but that's a review for another Christmas. Prancer Returns is set in 2001 as we revisit the town where the first movie took place. Things have changed slightly since the 80s, and one of the biggest changes is that the town has embraced the legend of Prancer. Basically, the plot of the first movie's become a local town legend, even though it actually happened with proof and witnesses within the last 2 decades. There's a big Christmas parade that takes place every year through the town as a result. All the models of Santa and his sleigh, however, are missing Prancer, and the idea goes that Prancer remains missing until Christmas Eve, when the town's local voluntary handyman, Tom, has to travel around the town adding Prancer into the lineup in time for Christmas Day. It's been a tradition every year since the events of Prancer, and this year will be no different. Our movie follows Charlie, a rambunctious little tyke who's recently moved with his brother and mother to their mum's hometown. Charlie's mum, Denise, has recently divorced their father, and she wants to go back to the town she grew up in to start again fresh and reconnect herself with her kids. Charlie's brother, however, is fed up with this decision as he wanted to spend Christmas with his father, to the point where he eventually ends up leaving for Chicago altogether. Charlie, who has to deal with an unhappy brother, a recently divorced mother, the playground bullies, a crush, and the principal, who he refers to as Darth Vader due to how nasty he is to him, is having a particularly bad time of things. That is until Charlie meets Tom. Tom proceeds to tell Charlie all about the legend of Prancer, and Charlie's absolutely mesmerised by this pure act of magic. That night, Charlie goes home and prays to Jesus that everyone in the town should have a good Christmas. Almost immediately the next day, he ends up in detention thanks to local bullies. However, this turns out to be a blessing in disguise, as after the detention, Charlie, walking home alone in the dark, in the middle of winter I might add, ends up hearing a strange noise coming from the woods. He decides to investigate, and on wandering deeper into the woods, he finds a very dead deer and its offspring. The dead deer then turns to snow and is blown away, leaving the baby deer both panicked and alone. Charlie decides that he can't just leave the deer in the woods alone, so he adopts it as a friend and decides to hide it in his house. Cue 40 to 50 minutes of comedy hijinks in which the deer gets Charlie in trouble, the townspeople slowly realise that Charlie is keeping a deer in his house, and when the animal control team end up getting involved, Charlie and Prancer 2, Electric Boogaloo, have to go on the run, as Charlie desperately tries to keep Prancer 2 safe until Christmas Eve, when he can take him up to Antler Ridge in time for the night before Christmas when Santa will be passing by. There's also 2 B-plots regarding a Scrooge-esque farmer who helps Charlie with the deer, giving it milk and keeping it hidden from the animal control team when it seems like things are getting bleak, and there's another B-plot involving Charlie's mum dating the principal of Charlie's school, whilst also having the hots for Tom the handyman. I'll talk about that more though, later. This tape was part of a haul I scored about a year or so ago, and with it being lumped in amongst some genuine classics from a clearly older film collector who was very much into martial arts movies, I'd naturally assumed that it would at least have some semblance of quality about it. And it's not outright awful, honestly, it's just pretty bad. The biggest problem this film has is the illusion that this film takes place at Christmas time is absolutely ruined because at least 2/3 of this film have been colour corrected in such a way that makes every scene look radioactively orange. Now, colour correction is an integral part of the cinema experience. It can be used to tremendous effect. For example, an orange tinge in a living room scene at Christmas can make the scene look much more warmer and pleasant and comfortable and inviting. It can make the room feel much more festive. However, using orange outside can make an outdoor scene feel warm, summery, and generally quite hot. You'd typically tinge afternoon and evening footage slightly orange on a summer shoot to make sure that the summer evening sun looked all the more warmer and gave off a full summery vibe. Here it's supposed to be a week or so before Christmas, and there's minimal to no snow in the first act, and pretty much every outdoor shot in the first and second act, barring day for night shots, are tinged orange. The result is a feeling of doublethink, where my brain is simultaneously telling me that this is set at Christmas, but also that it's really warm. It's jarring and very unpleasant to both look at and sit through. Had they tinted it even slightly blue, or even at minimum just corrected it to look as natural as possible, it probably would have felt a lot colder and actually looked and felt like a Christmas film. Instead, this looks like a film that was shot in the middle of July, but has all the cast going, "Oh boy, it's so cold here in Christmas." In July. So a massive markdown for me on that one. On the subject of casting, I'll be honest, no one here is particularly great. Gavin Fink as Charlie here gives a performance that's very stiff, it's not believable in the slightest, and it's just actually quite a bit boring, honestly. Michael O'Keefe is equally as wooden and bland in the role of Charlie's head teacher, Mr. Clock. Honestly, there's maybe 2 good performances in this film. Jack Palance as the farmer, Old Man Richards, has surprisingly got an OK B-plot. His performance in portraying a grumpy old man who reconnects with his emotions and embraces the holiday season is arguably the best aspect of this film. Equally, John Corbett is OK as Tom. He's not exactly stand out in his performance, but he's probably the second best performer in this movie. Which isn't really saying much, but there you go. He has a pleasant charisma about him, and the scenes that he's in are probably the least awful of any of the scenes in this movie. For the rest of the cast, though, I only have one word. Bland. Just bland. They're all almost one click off literally being robots. They don't know how to react to normal people and conversations. They don't emote properly, and they can barely deliver a line without feeling like I'm watching a rehearsal. Really dreadful performances on show here for the most part, honestly. The script? Blech. Honestly, it's sludge at its finest. Grey matter that simply exists to confine itself within the most generic 3-act structure possible. Charlie's main plot is very boring and very predictable in terms of what actually occurs. I'm going to get this out of the way right away. The characters are just very poorly written. Particularly Charlie's mum, Denise, who, having recently been divorced, appears to be somewhat coping in the midst of a full nervous breakdown. For starters, she has a complete breakdown at one point in the film over whether she's a good mother to Charlie or not. That comes out of nowhere and doesn't go anywhere either. It's literally just one scene where she suddenly breaks down, and within 5 minutes she's pulled herself back together again and it's never mentioned again. Equally, the way she's written regarding her love triangle clearly shows that the main writer on this had no experience of writing for female characters at all. Denise has the choice of any man or woman in the town, and she ends up in a triangle between the head teacher, who's a little bit of a creep but is somewhat stable, or Tom, the brother of a guy she was friends with about 10 years ago who all but sleeps in his truck and spends most of his time fishing, hiking, or generally not being around. And the moment she sees Tom, all of her dialogue from that point onwards could easily be compartmentalised as, "Give me your cock." And when Tom isn't in the picture, it could be summarised as, "I wish Tom was here. Boy, I want his cock." I'm not exaggerating when I say that this film could not go to greater lengths to try and put across that Charlie's mum desperately wants to bang Tom. Don't believe me? There's a line in the movie where Charlie's mum is fishing around to find out if there's a Mrs. Tom, or more importantly, why he hasn't had any kids. While on a date with the principal, Denise finds out that Tom allegedly made it clear he didn't want any kids and was too irresponsible to keep a wife. However, after Denise sees Tom interact with Charlie, she has a bit of an emotional wingding about how happy she is that Charlie and Tom get on, before she says the line, and I'm really not making this up, "You know, Tom, if you ever wanted to have kids, you have quite an easy way with it."
It's knickers, knackers, dockers.
And you can practically hear her ovaries screaming. It's embarrassing from both a script and acting perspective. Basically, it's irritating. She doesn't stop for the rest of the movie, and it totally kills her character stone dead, because she basically just becomes one note from around the second act onwards. It would have been really nice to see her develop a backbone, stand up, be a strong independent woman holding down a house and raising 2 rambunctious preteens. You know, give her an actual character. But instead the film makes her pretty subservient to the plot needs for convenience, and honestly she could have disappeared from the second act onwards and it wouldn't have made any significant change to the plot from there on in. Equally, the general plotline of trying to get Prancer Jr. back to Santa is a bit of a naff premise. Given that the original film literally has that plot, if you're gonna do a sequel going, alright, let's do what we did 12 years ago but with more references to the internet, is a pretty shit way to do your movie sequels. You could have done anything with this film, but to retread old ground is at best lazy and at worst a time killer. I could have reviewed better things in the time I wasted watching this film. A film that, honestly, will be filed under B as soon as I've finished cutting this review. The direction and cine are mediocre. Think a generic Hallmark-style Christmas movie from the early 2000s and you're on the right track. It doesn't say anything. For the most part, it doesn't feel Christmassy, and it takes until at least a third, if not halfway through the film, before we even see a Christmas tree. Which is just mad considering this is a Christmas movie. There's no character in the direction, there's no feel to this film, no vibe. And a lack of variety on shot types really leaves this film feeling very undernourished creatively. It left me ultimately wondering, why bother if you're only going to half-arse it? There isn't a single beautiful shot in this film. Not one. There's not even one that made me go, oh, that's a bit different. Take away what little snow there is and it'd look like any generic soap opera or TV movie of the week broadcast any day of the year between 1998 and 2003. It's boring, and that's probably its biggest crime. Equally, the soundtrack is painfully dull. It's mainly orchestral mixes of Christmas classics, meaning they don't have to pay the full licensing fees because the rights to those songs are usually public domain. Again, it's generic wallpaper tat, it does nothing, and I had to struggle with some songs to even make out what Christmas classic they were supposed to be performing. Truly painful. This film was brought to us by director Joshua Butler. Joshua is mainly a director and producer, but neither of these roles have garnered anything particularly noteworthy, and his filmography mainly consists of TV episodes of short-lived series. He does have some short films and the occasional forgotten TV movie, but seeing this, I'm now not that surprised at how this film has turned out the way it has. On writing duties for this one, we have Greg Taylor. Greg wrote Jumanji. Yes, that Jumanji. I'm honestly stunned as the dip in quality between that movie and this one is frankly astounding. This couldn't scream paycheck job harder if it tried. He's seriously phoning in his abilities here. Made all the more painful when I found out that he also wrote the original Prancer as well. So he had a stake in this film. He was expanding his own universe and he chose to do so in what I would consider the shittest way possible. He's also predominantly written only Christmas-themed films since Jumanji, and his last written feature was in 2003. Disappointing. Prancer Returns was released on VHS and DVD by Universal in 2001. It's now out of print, and if you live in the US, you're shit out of luck in finding a cheap copy of this, because the cheapest I could find it for was roughly £10, $14, plus shipping. It's not worth that. It really isn't. In the UK it's about £5, and shipping is included in that, but it's not worth that either. There's no extras that I can see, unsurprisingly, and the picture quality is standard for DVDs of that time. Not brilliant, but better than VHS. In short, this is an awful release, and I can't see it making its way to Blu-ray on its own. Maybe it'll end up packaged together with the original movie at some point. But given that the original is in relative obscurity, don't hold your breath on that happening anytime soon. Prancer Returns is a disappointment. It's a sequel that didn't need to be made, that the studio had little to no faith in, and it looks from my future 21st century eyes to have been nothing more than a cash grab for bleary-eyed adults who saw the original movie in the 80s and wanted a hit of nostalgia. I get that. But you can do movies that rely on nostalgia so much better than this movie, I want to say, attempts. It doesn't even try to attempt something new, so I don't know. It's a film that exists for literally no reason. I won't be watching it again, as it was boring, bland, unoriginal, and a bit offensive at times. I don't think I'd even consider this movie background fodder, as for a massive chunk of the film's runtime, it doesn't look or feel at all Christmassy. There's much better out there, and honestly, I advise you look elsewhere.